Bonjour tout le monde. Very pleased to be with you this afternoon. And you may remember when I had the pleasure and the honor to join you last year, I gave you an overview of some cool facts about bluefin tuna. And these were very general pieces of information. And I think people enjoyed that. But this year I thought I'd try something a little bit different. I thought we'd give you some of the results from the research, which is of interest to this area and those of you involved in the fishery in off southwest Nova Scotia. So we'll try this, and I'll speak to some of the slides on the screen on the right. My presentation is very short, and I'll just go through it and try and describe the slides well. So for 99% of you that can't see the slides, I'll try and make it clear what the points are. So that this first slide gives the introduction to this talk and points out that I'm going to quickly describe the results of some of the tagging study, which many of you have been involved with. And also last year we did a study of the survival of bluefin after being caught in an experimental fishery and then released in the water. So this was one way in which you can spin out your quota, make it last longer, and possibly have a new industry. And so we tried this in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence, and I'll share those results with you very, very shortly. So as far as the tagging results, we have a whole cast of characters shown on the slide. Many of the people that have been instrumental to the success of this work are seated in this room, particular Eric Chicard and Chris Malone. They are two key players, but there are also many others that have contributed to the success of this program. It's primarily led by Dr. Molly Cabbage, and she's been a great partner for DFO and others in this area. I want to show you some of the results from this. Last year, I showed you these sorts of tags which we put on the back of these poor bluefin tuna, which must carry this tag, which is about 6 inches long. And some of them carry it for a full year and on their migrations across the Atlantic, covering many thousands of kilometers. So here, it points out that our tagging database, we've now been at this for many years, and we have many hundreds of satellite transmissions which have been received from these fish. And when you look at the big picture shown here, this shows individual geolocations, points at which the fish occupied in the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see they've been ranging from the Gulf of Mexico fairly far north. In fact, just 2 days ago, we received information from a fish which reported off Labrador, and it was tagged in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So we're learning something new about these fish all the time, and it's through these cooperative efforts that we really are making progress in our understanding. So now to some results from southwest Nova Scotia, and this is from tagging work in 2009. I'm not sure that many can see it, but I just wanted to point out that some of the tracks of the fish, which were released off, I think it was Riverport, didn't go into Gulf of Mexico, and that was kind of a surprise for us. Because if we look at some of the other tagging studies, typically there's a very clear connection with the Gulf of Mexico. But for some of these fish which have been released off of here in particular, they take different routes. And this is leading us to wonder about alternatives to spawning in the Gulf of Mexico. This is just kind of preliminary at this stage. But if we look at some of the results of tagging by another group, Barbara Block's group in the Gulf of Mexico, we can see a clear connection with the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Gulf of Mexico, which we don't see from some of the work which we've done here. Now, the reasons for that, there are three possible reasons. One might be that the fish which we get off these waters are a little bit smaller than what we see in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and perhaps they're not ready to spawn, so they're not going into the principal spawning area. We don't think that's the case. We think that these are mature, but we still have to work that particular angle out. The second explanation could be that, like many some fish species, perhaps they only spawn every second year. There are some fish species which show this sort of behavior. And the last explanation is, of course, we don't know all the spawning grounds yet, and perhaps they're also spawning, as Dr. Lukavich has suggested, off the Bahamas. So that's an alternative which really has important implications for the way we do our stock assessment and we manage the resource. And it's really through the efforts of groups such as yourself, which have been willing to work with scientists so closely and so well, that we're making these great steps in our understanding. So that's my thumbnail sketch of the first study. Now we'll move on to the second one. And here, what we're talking about is, as I mentioned earlier, how well do these fish survive? If you fight them just as you've been fighting tuna in your tournament, could you put them back in the water and expect them to survive very well? And the reason this is of concern, of course, is that these fish sometimes get exhausted. If we fight them long, we know they're going to not do so well. And our interest in the case of the Gulf of St. Lawrence was, fishermen said, well, we'd like to spin out our quota, we'd like to make it last longer. Could we have a commercial catch and release fishery? So, of course, this seemed like a reasonable possibility, but from a departmental point of view, we need to know how many fish die as a result of this sort of activity. So we designed a study to get at this question, and we used the same tool which I mentioned in the first study, that satellite transmitter. So what we did in this case is we affixed tags to 59 giant bluefin tuna split roughly between eastern and western Prince Edward Island, if you can see this slide here, and we followed their survival. We tried to have the volunteer fishermen fish just as they would in the case of a recreational fishery, keeping track of the water temperatures, how long they fought the fish for, to find out how the fish did. The answer was quite surprisingly good, that in this case we had evidence of 2 fish dying out of the 59 which were tagged. We also had 1 fish which was tail wrapped, as they didn't keep tension on the rod as it came alongside, so it took a wrap around its tail. And as you all know, once the fish is not swimming and ventilating its gills, it's going to die very quickly. So we lost that one as well. And 2 tags didn't report. So if you took that all into consideration, the overall mortality rate was about 5% for this type of study, which we think is very encouraging, and it offers prospects for other groups that become interested in having this type of study. You could give this some thought and talk to fisheries managers about this possibility, and if science can help you in any regard, of course, we'd be interested in doing that. I just want to give you an example of what happens to these satellite tags. I don't know how well you can see this, but what happens in this case, this shows the depth that's occupied by the fish over time, and then it goes to the bottom. This fish died. It went straight to the bottom, and the way the satellite tag operates is if it's on a constant depth for 48 hours, it detaches and floats to the surface and sends the information to the satellite. So you can see this very clear pattern of a mortality in this case. So I think it's good for us in this case to have done the work, and it also shows that Canada is taking leadership in doing this sort of work. To my knowledge, we're the only nation which has undertaken this kind of study, and we're showing proper responsible action to make sure we account for all mortalities in our fishery. So with that, I think that's the concluding slide. My Tuna is saying merci beaucoup for the attention, and I want to conclude by saying c'est avec grand plaisir que je m'adresse à vous. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention et intérêt. Si vous avez des questions, je serai assis pour le reste de la journée. S'il vous plaît, n'hésitez pas pour approcher